It happened in a single heartbeat. Cameras were flashing, people were talking, and yet, in the middle of that chaos, they saw only each other. Yaman and Demet Özdemir. For a brief, electric second, the world around them vanished. Their eyes met, not as co-stars, not as two professionals on a set, but as two souls who suddenly remembered something they had never forgotten. It wasn't planned. It wasn't for the cameras. It was real, raw, and undeniable. Those who were there that night still talk about it. It was during a crowded industry event in Istanbul, months after they had both gone their separate ways. Ken had been busy in Italy, filming and building a new life far from Turkey. Demet, on the other hand, had buried herself in work, taking on new roles, traveling, smiling for every interview. Yet behind those smiles was a silence, the kind of silence only someone who once loved deeply can carry. When they crossed paths again, no one expected fireworks. People thought they had moved on. But that one look, that simple, unguarded glance, said everything words never could. Can's expression softened, the kind of look that carries memories too heavy for language. Demet's eyes trembled for a moment before she looked away, trying to hide what was still written on her face. Witnesses say it was like watching two magnets pulled toward each other, even though both tried to resist. A friend who stood nearby whispered, "You could feel the tension in the air." It was like time had stopped. And maybe, in a way, it had. Because in that moment, every rumor, every headline, every denial faded, and only the truth between them remained. For Can, that look brought back everything he had tried to forget, the laughter on set, the quiet talks after long filming days, the way she used to understand him without words. For Demet, it was like seeing the ghost of a love she had never truly buried. Their eyes spoke in silence. "Are you happy? Do you still think about me? Do you regret it too?" Neither of them said a word. They didn't have to. Everyone watching knew something powerful had just happened, something unscripted, unfiltered, and deeply human. But what no one knew was what happened after that glance. Because that night didn't end on the red carpet. When the lights dimmed and the camera stopped flashing, the echo of that moment still hung in the air. People moved on, the crowd dissolved, but Ken didn't. He stood still for a few seconds longer than anyone noticed, as if his body refused to obey time. Demet had already disappeared into the crowd, guided by her manager, smiling to avoid suspicion. Yet inside, her pulse was racing. That single look had cracked open something she thought she'd sealed forever. Backstage, silence fell heavy between the corridors. The noise of laughter and music from the main hall felt distant now, like another world entirely. Ken found himself standing near the exit, pretending to check his phone. He wasn't waiting for anyone, at least, that's what he told himself. But then he heard it. The familiar sound of her heels on the marble floor. Slow, hesitant steps. Each one bringing her closer. For a moment, they were just two people again, no lights, no interviews, no distance. Just him and her. She hesitated before speaking, her voice quiet but trembling. "Can, it's been a long time." He turned slowly, and when their eyes met again, the world spun back into that dangerous, beautiful silence. "It has," he said softly. "Too long, maybe." There were so many things to say, but neither dared to start. They stood inches apart, both carrying the weight of all the words left unsaid. Ken noticed she was wearing the same perfume she used to wear during the filming of her Kenzie Cuss. One breath, and suddenly he was back there, the long nights on set, the teasing, the quiet laughter between takes, the energy they tried to call acting, even though it had become something else entirely. Demet looked down for a second, clutching her purse tightly. "I didn't think we'd ever be in the same room again," she said. Ken smiled faintly. "Neither did I. But maybe, some things are meant to happen, even when we think they're over." She looked at him then, really looked. And that was when he saw it, the sadness in her eyes, the exhaustion of pretending she had moved on. For all her strength, all her grace, Demet was human, still haunted by what they never dared to finish. The sound of approaching footsteps broke the moment. Their teams were looking for them. Instinctively, they both stepped back, two professionals, once again separated by duty and image. Ken gave a small nod, a silent promise. Later, he mouthed. She nodded back, unsure if he meant it. That night, as Demet's car drove away, she stared out the window, her reflection mixing with the city lights. Her phone buzzed once, an unknown number, a simple message. "We need to talk." See. Demet stared at her phone for minutes, frozen. The city lights of Istanbul blurred past her window, but all she could see was that message, short, simple, and heavy with everything unsaid. "We need to talk." See. It had been years since she'd seen his name appear on her screen. Years since she'd sworn she wouldn't let him back in. And yet, there it was. A door she thought was forever closed, slightly open again. She didn't reply right away. Her driver asked softly if everything was okay, and she nodded without speaking. But her hands trembled. She kept reading the message over and over, as if the words would change. "We need to talk." What could he possibly want to say after all this time? Back in her apartment, she poured herself a glass of water, trying to steady her breath. The city outside was still alive, horns, laughter, late-night traffic, but inside, everything felt painfully quiet. She sat on her couch, staring at the empty space in front of her. Every corner of that room held a ghost. A memory, a laugh, a look that belonged to him. The sweater he once left there after a long day of filming, the scent that had lingered long after he'd gone. She remembered their last real conversation, the one that ended everything. The shouting, the tears, the silence that followed. He had walked away that night, saying it was better for both of them. She had believed him for a while, until she realized he had taken something with him she could never get back. Now, years later, the message reopened the wound. She typed a reply, "There's nothing left to talk about." But she couldn't send it. Something inside her refused. Instead, she set her phone down, stood by the window, and whispered to herself, "If I see him again, I'll ask him why." Meanwhile, across the city, Ken sat in his hotel room, staring at the same screen, waiting for the three dots to appear, those three blinking signs of a message being written. But they never came. He leaned back, sighing, his thoughts drifting to the night's encounter. That look in her eyes had undone him completely. He hadn't planned to text her. In fact, he'd promised himself years ago that he wouldn't. But seeing her again had reminded him of the one truth he could no longer run from, that he had never truly stopped loving her. The next morning, Demet woke up to another message, longer this time. "I'll be at the cafe by the Bosphorus tomorrow, 9 p.m. If you come, I'll know I still mean something. If you don't, I'll never ask again." Her heart raced. She read it again and again. The clock ticked louder than usual that day. Every minute closer to 9 p.m. felt like a test she wasn't sure she wanted to pass. The next evening arrived like a storm she'd seen coming but couldn't escape. All day, Demet tried to lose herself in work, interviews, fittings, calls, but her thoughts kept circling back to one place, that cafe by the Bosphorus, 9 p.m. Every time she looked at her phone, her chest tightened. She hadn't replied to his message, yet she knew he would be there, waiting. Ken always kept his word. As the clock approached 8:30, she stood before the mirror, unsure what to wear. It wasn't about fashion, not tonight. It was about control. About not letting him see the trembling underneath the calm. She chose something simple, neutral, the kind of outfit that said "I'm fine" even when she wasn't. She looked at her reflection and whispered, "It's just a conversation. Nothing more." But her heart didn't believe it. Outside, the city glowed softly. The sea shimmered beneath the streetlights, and the night carried that faint autumn chill that always reminded her of him. Every street they'd ever walked together seemed alive again in her mind, the late-night tea shops, the small parks, the quiet car rides filled with laughter and silence in equal measure. When she arrived, the cafe was nearly empty. The gentle sound of the waves mixed with the hum of distant music. And there he was. sitting by the window, looking out at the water. He hadn't changed much. Maybe a little older, maybe a little quieter. But those eyes, the same eyes that had once made her forget every rule she'd lived by, they were still his. He looked up and saw her. For a second, he didn't move. Then, slowly, a faint smile appeared. "You came." Demet hesitated before answering. "I almost didn't." "I know," he said softly. "But you did. That's enough." They sat facing each other, and for a while, neither spoke. The silence between them was not empty, it was full, crowded with everything they wanted to say but didn't know how. Ken finally broke it. "I shouldn't have left the way I did," he admitted. "I thought distance would make it easier to forget. But it didn't. It only made everything worse." Demet looked down at her hands. "You made it look easy, though. You moved on. New life, new country, new stories." He sighed. "Stories don't mean much when you can't tell them to the person who inspired them." Her eyes lifted to his, the pain softening just a little. "So why now, Ken? Why reach out after all this time?" He hesitated, then leaned closer. "Because last night, when our eyes met, I realized I was still living the same lie. Pretending I was fine when I wasn't." Her breath caught. "And what do you want from me?" He smiled sadly. "Nothing. Just the truth. Whatever it is." The wind from the open window brushed through her hair as she looked away, blinking back tears. For the first time in years, she didn't have an answer. The waiter arrived, breaking the spell, and placed 2 cups of Turkish tea in front of them. Neither touched theirs. They just sat there, side by side, 2 people staring at a past that refused to die. Outside, the Bosphorus shimmered, and somewhere between the ripples, their reflection appeared, fragile but still together. The night wind carried whispers from the sea, the kind that make you remember what you tried so hard to forget. Demet sat in silence, her eyes fixed on the reflection of city lights dancing on the water. Ken leaned back, watching her, afraid that one wrong word would shatter the fragile peace between them. For years, he'd rehearsed this moment in his head, but now that it was here, every word felt both too heavy and not enough. Finally, he spoke, quietly, but with that same deep voice that used to calm her in the darkest moments. "Demet. I need to tell you something. Something I should have said a long time ago." She didn't move. Her eyes stayed on the sea, but he knew she was listening. "I didn't leave because I stopped loving you," he continued. "I left because I didn't know how to stay." Demet turned to him, her expression unreadable. "What does that even mean, Ken?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Everything was moving too fast, the fame, the attention, the constant rumors. "And then us. I thought I could handle it, but I couldn't. Every day on set, I was terrified that what we had would ruin what we'd built. I convinced myself I was protecting you by leaving." Her voice was sharp, trembling. "Protecting me? You disappeared without a word, Ken. You left me to face everything alone, the questions, the headlines, the pity." "I know," he said softly. "And I've lived with that guilt every single day since." There was a long silence. The waves outside hit the rocks, echoing the weight in the air. Demet's eyes glistened, but she refused to let the tears fall. "Do you think an apology fixes that?" she whispered. "No," he admitted. "But it's a start. Because if I don't say it now, I'll never forgive myself." She looked away, trying to steady her breath. Her voice cracked when she spoke again. "You don't get to come back just because you finally feel sorry. People heal, Ken. They build walls. And I had to learn to live without you." He reached out, his hand trembling slightly. "And did you?" She froze. For a moment, their eyes met again, that same dangerous connection that had started everything. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Because the truth was, she hadn't. Ken smiled sadly, lowering his hand. I didn't either. The silence that followed was no longer painful, it was honest. Two hearts that had broken each other, now standing bare under the same night sky. Demet finally spoke, her voice fragile but steady. You think we could ever go back to what we were? He shook his head. No. But maybe we can start again, not as who we were, but as who we've become. Her breath hitched. The part of her that still hurt wanted to say no. But another part, the one that had never stopped loving him, whispered yes. She stood up slowly. If we do this, no more running. No more silence. He rose too, his gaze unwavering. No more lies. They didn't hug, they didn't kiss. They just stood there, the sound of the Bosphorus filling the space between them, like a promise, fragile but real. And for the first time in years, Demet smiled. Not for the cameras. Not for the world. For him. The night they met by the Bosphorus was supposed to be a goodbye, a final conversation, nothing more. Yet somehow, it became the beginning of something new. The next morning, both woke up with the same strange feeling, calm but restless. The kind of peace that comes after years of chaos, and yet hides an uneasiness underneath. Demet spent the morning avoiding her phone, but her mind wouldn't stop replaying the night before. The Waken had looked at her, the tremble in his voice, the honesty in his eyes. It was dangerous, she knew that. Because if she let those feelings in again, there would be no turning back. Still, when she looked at herself in the mirror, she saw something she hadn't seen in a long time, warmth. Across the city, Ken sat on his balcony, coffee in hand, staring at the skyline. He had tried to move on with his life in Italy, but everything there suddenly felt distant, meaningless. For the first time in years, Istanbul felt alive again. It felt like home. They didn't plan to see each other again so soon, but fate has its own way of writing stories. A few days later, both were invited to a private film premiere, different projects, same industry circle. The moment the guest list leaked to the press, rumors started swirling online. Can and Demet to reunite? Old flames back in the same room? That night, Demet arrived in a simple black dress, elegant but understated. She'd told herself it didn't matter if he was there. But when she saw him across the room, standing tall, surrounded by laughter, yet still scanning the crowd until his eyes found hers, she felt that same pull again. They didn't talk much at the event. Just a nod, a soft smile, a glance that lasted a bit too long. But to the photographers watching, that was enough. The next morning, social media exploded. Can Yaman and Demet Özdemir, eyes don't lie, eyes fire, after years of silence. What's really going on? Demet's team called her immediately. We need a statement, they urged. People are talking again. It's everywhere. But Demet didn't want to deny it. Not this time. Let them talk, she said quietly. Meanwhile, Can's phone was ringing nonstop, friends, journalists, producers. But he ignored them all. That night, he sent her one message: if the world's going to talk, let's at least give them something worth talking about. She smiled when she read it, shaking her head in disbelief. You never change, she whispered, but her heart skipped anyway. Within a week, they were seen together again, at a small cafe in Nisantacy, late at night, no cameras, no entourage. Just two people talking, laughing, rediscovering what they'd lost. And for the first time in a long time, Demet felt light. She didn't know where this was going, or whether it would survive the spotlight again. But for now, the silence between them had turned into something else, hope. Outside, the whispers continued to grow. Headlines, gossip shows, fan theories. But none of it mattered. Because the truth, the real truth, was happening quietly, in stolen moments, far away from the noise. For a while, everything felt like a dream. Late-night walks by the water, quiet dinners, messages that stretched until sunrise. It was as if they had found a way to rewrite their story. But the past has a cruel way of testing what's real. It started small, a leaked photo, a journalist's exclusive, whispers of jealousy from people around them. Suddenly, old wounds began to resurface. Every step they took in public became a headline. Every smile became proof, every silence a fight. One night, Demet sat alone on her balcony, scrolling through articles that twisted everything they had said and done. The same media that had once celebrated them was now trying to break them apart again. She felt that old fear returning, the one that had destroyed them the first time. When Ken arrived at her place that night, she didn't smile. She handed him her phone, showing him the headlines. "They're already turning this into a circus," she said, her voice tired. He read the articles quietly, then placed the phone on the table. "Let them," he said firmly. "We know the truth." She shook her head. "That's what we said last time too. And look what happened." Ken stepped closer. "Last time, we were scared. We cared too much about what people thought. I'm not running this time, Demet." She looked at him, her eyes filling with tears. "But what if I am?" He froze. For the first time, he didn't know what to say. She turned away, whispering, "You can handle the spotlight. You were born for it. But me? I can't live every day wondering when they'll twist our story again." He reached out, gently taking her hand. "Then let's write our own story, one they can't rewrite." She looked at him, at the man who had once broken her heart, and yet somehow, still made her feel safe. "Do you really believe that's possible?" she asked softly. He smiled faintly. "I believe in us." For a long moment, she didn't answer. Then she took a deep breath and leaned into his chest. His arms wrapped around her like they always had, steady, warm, familiar. "I missed this," she whispered. "I never stopped missing you," he replied. Outside, the city lights flickered, reflecting on the waves like fragments of their past. Somewhere below, a boat horn echoed through the night, a reminder that time keeps moving, no matter how hard you try to hold on. And in that embrace, they both knew the truth, they couldn't undo the past. But maybe, just maybe, they could finally make peace with it.